The freedom of getting behind the wheel and heading off is something we all take for granted, but will you know when it's time to call it a day? More than 4 million drivers are aged 70 or over, and that figure's increasing by 10,000 every month. So, does experience bring safer driving, or are some pensioners a hazard on our roads? Former Top Gear presenter Angela Rippon investigates.
He's coming at speed, mate. He's coming at speed.
There's a reason that older drivers have a bad rep.
He's going to hit, he's going to hit, he's going to hit, he's going to hit us! I had to, mate.
A 77-year-old motorist with dementia was driving on the motorway in the wrong direction. The only way the traffic cops could stop him was by blocking his path, and thankfully no one was hurt. And there was another lucky escape, when an 88-year-old driver ploughed into this hairdresser's. Isolated cases, of course, but something to ignore? Well, not according to these drivers in County Durham.
You should have at least done a basic health check.
Eye test.
Yeah, well, yeah, medical eye test, yeah.
I think they're all right, but sometimes they're a bit slow.
If it comes to an emergency stop, I mean, you know what I mean? Are they quick enough?
But is that true? Do we really get less sharp behind the wheel as we get older? Even if you're a former Top Gear presenter like me. Actually, I was on the road in a skid. Would I react in that way? Well, it's likely that my driving skills aren't quite what they were back then. And yet, the government seems happy for us veteran roadsters to drive on and on. All we have to do is sign a declaration every 3 years saying that we are fit to drive. But is that enough? Or should millions of drivers who, like me, are now more than 70, be forced to retake our driving test? After all, that is exactly what happens abroad. Time for an international road trip. In parts of the good old US of A, and even as far away as New Zealand, some older drivers do have to take a road test. Whilst in Europe there are countries like Italy, Portugal and the Netherlands that insist on older drivers having a medical examination. But hold your horses. That wouldn't go down well with many pensioners. Take these two in Darlington.
I've been driving 40 years, at least. I was 48 when I learned, and I'm 89 now, so I'm a good driver. My husband said I'm a good driver, so that's all right.
A lot of people after 70 and older people are more cautious drivers, have been driving for a long time, they have a lot of experience, and they're far better drivers because of the way they drive and the speeds they drive at than the younger generation.
Some of these younger drivers are not very capable. You've got to watch out for them, haven't you? And, you know, think they're the only ones that can drive.
I know how mad I was in the 20s, and I suppose I was lucky to get away with a lot of things I didn't, particularly when driving long distances.
Peter and Dot say that the idea of bringing in a compulsory test for older drivers shouldn't be taken lightly.
I wouldn't be very happy, but I wouldn't mind. I'd take my driving less if I had to. I'd do well, I should do well, after all these years' experience.
I'm 80 years old and I want to keep on driving, and I don't want to be tested every 5 minutes, and I don't want it to actually cost a lot of money, because as we get older we have less available money to spend, so we'd rather spend it on going out for lunch.
But for one family, the lack of a proper exam had devastating consequences.
Ronnie had just gone out and bought a new motorbike on that same day. He'd left the house about 15 minutes and the phone rang. It was his sister saying that he'd been knocked off his bike.
In 2013, Ronnie Johnson was involved in a crash with an 84-year-old woman in Easington.
They said they were taking him to James Cook Hospital, so we followed through in the car. And obviously when we got there, he'd already been pronounced dead on arrival. So
It wasn't until much later that Marie found out that the woman shouldn't have been on the road at all.
Obviously our eyesight wasn't good enough. She should never have been driving. Her eyesight just wasn't good enough. She clearly never saw Ronnie, and she wasn't even aware that she'd hit him. But nothing's going to replace him. He's never coming back, and Jack's never going to have his dad. Going to rugby matches and kickboxing, all the things that he does, and not having his dad there to support him is really hard.
So, should the law change? Time for a scientific test. Well, to find out whether or not our driving skills really do deteriorate as we get older, I've come to the Transport Research Laboratory at Wokingham, where they've got a state-of-the-art driving simulator. And to help me, I brought along 2 other drivers. I'll be representing older drivers, Michelle middle-aged motorists, and her son Daniel young drivers. We each spend 15 minutes in the simulator. It tests 2 things: our ability to keep a safe distance from the car in front and how well we react to hazards. Our backseat driver is Dr. Sean Hellman, a transport psychologist. What's he doing? He's slowing down.
What we see her do is take a reasonable amount of time to react. Oh, that was close.
Pulled out without indicating.
They do actually indicate.
Ah, but it's not all bad.
Angela is doing really well on some of these tasks.
Some praise at last. But how do I compare to young Daniel?
Come on, man.
He actually seems to be rather impatient.
Come on, Mr. Bus. That was a bit close.
At the moment, he's done 10 heavy braking events so far in the drive, which is quite a lot.
Interesting. I wonder if his mum Michelle is any better.
She's only had to apply the brakes really heavily once or twice.
Sounds promising. Time then for the big reveal. Well, Sean, I don't think any of us crashed the car or broke the speed limit, but apart from that, how did we all do?
There's one thing we did expect to see, which was borne out by the data, which is that you, as the older driver here, would be the slowest to react. We can see that you responded, on average, within about 1.5 seconds to those sudden events, whereas Daniel and Michelle were responding at about 1 second.
But that's only half a second.
Yeah, but half a second is quite a long time in terms of if you're travelling at 70 miles an hour, well, in the 1.5 seconds that it took you to respond, you've travelled 100 metres.
Whereas the other 2 would have travelled...
about 2/3 of that.
So, as the oldest driver, I had the slowest reactions, but Sean reveals that I wasn't the worst driver. That was Daniel.
He was the most erratic in terms of his increase in speed and decreases in speed. So I think there were 19 occasions in the drive when Daniel had to brake quite heavily because maybe he had not expected the car in front to slow down quite as much as it did.
That's his inexperience. Hard luck, Daniel. So, who came out on top? Michelle.
She was by far the smoothest driver, so she had, I think, only 4 heavy braking events. And interestingly, you, Angela, were in the middle with about 11.
Last year, for every 10,000 young drivers, 47 had an accident. For middle-aged drivers, that number was just 16. But for drivers over 70, it was just 12, making us, proportionally, the safest drivers of all. But older drivers do have an Achilles heel. We're prone to crashing at junctions.
This is an area that we know particularly some older drivers suffer, partly because they have various things going wrong visually, but also partly because of really simple things like how much they can turn their head.
In fact, research reveals that 28% of accidents involving older drivers are caused by them failing to look at junctions. For drivers under 70, it's just 18%.
So if we turn left at the crossroads?
It seems we just don't pay enough attention. So whilst we older drivers may have slower reactions and sometimes struggle at junctions, we are still statistically the safest on the road.
So, should we have a senior citizens driving test? And would you pass? Your views, please. Just email me, chrisjackson@bbc.co.uk.